again in the OEWeek Live studio. I'm your host, Alan Levine, and I'm messing up all the technology because that's what technology does. But I really want to thank anybody for being here and watching this. We're going to do something that I wasn't sure would work, but I'm going to bring in some folks, some colleagues who are at in a Discord meeting space for the OER 23 conference. And so there's a lot of synchronicity between Open Education Global and OER 23, and it's one of my favorite conferences. And I set this up, hopefully, that a few folks there can talk about the conference that's coming up in Inverness, Scotland in about a month, and just about what OER 23 is all about. So anybody there in Discord, can you at least let me know if this works?
Hi, Alan. This is Lorna here. You sound loud and clear to us.
Oh, good, Lorna. Thank you so much.
Hi, Alan. I can hear you perfectly.
Thank you, Paula.
Yeah. And me too, Alan.
Okay. So you're the spokespeople now for OER 23. What should people know about this conference?
If I can jump in there, I think probably the main thing to know about the OER conference is conference has been running for it's about 10 years now, and it originally started out as a very UK OER focused conference. Alt have been facilitating the conference for maybe about 6-7 years now, and since then it has really grown in focus to encompass really all aspects of open education practice, and it's also really welcomed participants from all over the world as well. But it's still quite a small and welcoming conference as well. You won't be overwhelmed at the OER conference, but it's really friendly. And speaking as a Highlander myself, which I know Sheila is as well, we can absolutely guarantee a warm welcome for everyone coming to the conference and visiting the Highlands and Inverness for the first time.
I know, and I'll have to say it's been a conference I went in 2014, I think, but the connections made there, just I remember I sound like I'm just like trying to sell the conference, but really the feeling in the sense of community among Alt and the OER XX conferences has always made it one of my favorite ones to either follow or be part of.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, Alan, I think the size of the conference is really, really quite unique in some ways, but it's big enough that there are people there to meet and you can make connections, but it's also small enough that you get a chance to speak to the people you want to speak to. You know, sometimes you can go to a session or listen to someone giving a keynote and you really want to have a conversation with them, and even if they're stick around in the conference, you never really get that opportunity. But I think with OER you can do that, and you don't need to feel scared about going and speaking to a keynote because everyone wants to have a conversation, and I think that's why the bonds around the conference are so strong. And I think even when like all conferences, when it had to go online, I think almost that in some ways, like that first year when it went online, forgive me, I can't even remember when that was. It's all just a blur now. I think that, you know, some of the connections were still there as well. But yes, it's a really really welcoming, as Lorna said, really welcoming and friendly, and of course open conference.
Right. Can you also talk about the connection with GoGN, which is kind of pretty much their co-hosting or this conference, and that's a powerful network of folks that we like to tap into.
Yeah, I'm not a member of GoGen, but I know that they have. I think it's been great for that network, because I think for a lot of the researchers in the network, it gives them maybe their first or second experience of going and presenting at a conference. I think they have a very strong network anyway, but again, it's that chance to be together and talk about their research. And the first day of the conference, I think they almost have their own little mini conference within that. But again, I think it's great to see that from someone who's not involved in that side of things. It's great to see that research coming through into kind of the wider conference as well. So it's great to have those research and practice links as well. because they can't be too distinct. There needs to be that, interrelationship between what people are doing, the research side, and what people are doing. People like Lorna and Paula, who are involved more than I am, really in kind of the open community, and actually putting this into practice within institutions.
I have to let you know I have Rob Farrow waiting in the wings to talk after we talk about you.
And Rob can tell you all.
Yes,
Rob can tell you all.
I know he can, but I wanted to hear about you. And we had one vid. I will mangle his name, from Edinburgh, who came on our show yesterday, I believe, and talked about his research.
Oh, well, that's great. I don't know him personally, but I think it's great to, again, just to give people the opportunity to talk about their research. It's so important for everyone, because you can get so immersed in what you're doing and just talking within your kind of direct contacts that sometimes you just, like everyone, you just need to look up and get some other opinions and share what you're doing with other people.
Right. And
Vid Minas is a researcher at the School of Informatics here at the University of Edinburgh, who is doing some research around sharing teaching materials for one of the courses he's involved in. Yeah,
thank you. And welcome to Paula Cardoso, who I see popped into this and probably not sure what's going on, but our audio from Discord is going into a conversation, a live show that we're having on the internet right now. And I just was hoping to get some people involved with the OER 23 conference to, share the excitement and their hopes for the conference. So if you feel like speaking, Paula, it'd be great to hear from you. You know, that awkward thing when you ask someone to like speak and they do I want to unmute my mic? It's quite fine. Maybe if you can talk about the location at Inverness and kind of the special nature of University of the Highlands, because they're kind of a unique institution.
Can I actually jump in there, Alan? With again, I'm not. I work at the University of Edinburgh, not at the University of Highlands and Islands. So I'll say a tiny wee bit about that. Sheila might actually know more about UHI than I do, because I know she works closely with some colleagues there. UHI began life as an amalgamation of colleges scattered right across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, and that covers a huge area, a significant area that takes in some very remote communities in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. I'm originally from the islands in the Outer Hebrides, and there's a campus in Stornoway, which is my hometown. And UHI came together and was awarded a university charter, and it's a very distributed organisation. But one of the things I wanted to mention, and one of the reasons why personally I'm really pleased that the conference is in Scotland again this year for only the second time. We hosted it here at the University of Edinburgh in 2016. However, this year marks 10 years of an initiative called the Open Scotland Initiative, which is a voluntary cross-sector initiative that a group of us established about exactly 10 years ago, to try to convince the Scottish Government of the benefits and affordances of open education and OER in particular. And really what we've been trying to do is to lobby the Scottish Government to back the use of open licensing for publicly funded education resources. And we haven't had a great deal of success in terms of lobbying the government here in Scotland, but I think we have had a bit of impact at the institutional level. And oddly enough, the Open Scotland Initiative has been quite influential out with our borders. Certainly we wrote something called the Scottish Open Education Declaration, which was very influential in Morocco. So one of the things we'll be doing at the conference is we have a pre-conference workshop on the Tuesday to bring together, hopefully, colleagues from across different education sectors in Scotland to discuss 10 years of open education advocacy in Scotland and really where we go from here. And if should we continue to try to lobby government? Should we focus our attention more on institutions? Is there still a need for this? what do we really want going forward. So if you happen to be in Inverness on the Tuesday before the conference, please do come and join us. And we'll also have a plenary. We'll be running the closing plenary at the conference, where again, we'll be talking about what it really is the way forward for open education in Scotland. And we'll have a panel session of colleagues from within Scotland. We'll have representatives of the Open Scotland Initiative, myself and Jo Wilson. We'll have Scott Connor from UHI. And we've also got a guest from the Netherlands who will be joining us to talk about how they have quite a different experience of supporting open education in the Netherlands. And also Maren herself, the CEO of ALT, will be joining us, because ALT have been very much instrumental in supporting openness in Scotland over the last decade. So we're delighted that Maren will be joining us too. So please do look out for more information about Open Scotland on its 10-year anniversary.
That's fantastic. And like, I've just honestly been in awe of the coordination and the cross-institutional support that appears to happen in Scotland, as well with the primary and secondary schools. I know a lot of your OER work supports teachers in the local schools.
Oh, sorry, Alan. I was just going to say, yeah, thanks for that great summary, Lorna, as well. But yeah, I think the size of Scotland helps that people know each other, so it's kind of easier to make connections. But there still is quite a lot of work to be done. But I think Lorna's right. You know, the support that the Open Scotland has gathered, and stalwarts like Jo and Lorna, you know, and their tireless engagement and support of it has really helped people to engage with openness as well. So yes, that's really exciting. But just maybe to say a little bit more about Inverness, because I will have to go in it a little while as well. Inverness is a lovely town, and the campus at UHI is really, really beautiful as well. It's got the most amazing views over to the mountains. There's a lovely pond in the campus, that there's lots of wildlife, and yeah, it's a nice place to be. Whatever the weather is, you can look at the weather on the mountains inside. Or I've been at meetings at UHI where actually probably in April and May, where the sun has been shining and we've been sitting outside, and it's been beautiful. Inverness itself is a really nice size of a town. I'm not sure if it's got city status yet. Lorna, you can maybe say in the chat. But
I think maybe it's a small city actually.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not sure, but it's a lovely size of a place, nice to go around. And there's the most fantastic bookshop called Leakey's Bookshop, which if you are going to be there in person, you must go and have a look at. In fact, I was speaking to Keith about this, and I think they're maybe going to try and put that into the social program, or, you know, give people directions to it, because it's just the most fascinating cavern of wild and wonderful books, and I'm sure that will appeal to everyone that's at UHI.
And
sorry, at the conference. Sorry.
Talking of wild and wonderful as well, if you're lucky, you might get to see the dolphins in the Murray Firth as well, which is the sea inlet that comes into Inverness. Inverness sits on the River Ness, the mouth of the River Ness on the Murray Firth there, and there's a huge population of dolphins, and porpoises there.
Now, come on! I think you're a little bit too modest. There's some magic in Scotland, right? And
absolutely. Well, we obviously haven't mentioned Nessie yet, but
that's the reason to go there. But yeah. Seriously, you know, I think you know, I was telling the group earlier about the podcast that Paul and I did with Tatiana Kolesnikova, who's the librarian in the Ukrainian, and I mean that. They were awarded like a resilience award for the librarians, but like speaking about how they responded, like I felt like the whole country it deserves a resilience award, because it was just amazing to hear her describe what went on. And to me, like Scotland has that same kind of atmosphere. Like, you know, I think stop selling yourselves short, okay? And go to Inverness. Everybody should go to Inverness for OER 23. See, I'm selling it for you.
And honestly, but whatever way you travel, it is just magnificent. Yeah. The countryside that you go through. If you get the train from the Central Belt, you go through Glencoe, you see everything. You know, every type of landscape that you could think about. It's not quite the actual Harry Potter line, but it's very, very close to that. It's stunning countryside. If you fly into Inverness, then obviously you're going to get an amazing view of the countryside. And yeah, I mean, Scotland is, and the north of Scotland, it's one of the last wildernesses in the world. So if you've got a chance to stay a couple of extra days, then it's amazing round about that area. And actually, I'm really looking forward to going up there myself.
Yeah. If you have the time, it's really worth trying to visit Urquhart Castle, which is at the head of Loch Ness. And there are various ways to get. You can actually go there by boat, which is stunning. But I mean, Scotland is not short of castles. You will see many of them en route, but Urquhart Castle really is a spectacular location. So it's really worth making the effort to visit there if you have a chance.
Okay.
And there is a castle in Inverness, but it's maybe not quite as stunning as Urquhart Castle. But you will get to see a castle even if
you kind of trip over them.
So there's a status in castles I'm getting.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so we definitely sold on Inverness. Anything, because I know I've kept you folks waiting. Paula, do you want to add anything about like what you're looking forward to at the conference?
I'm very excited because this is one of the best conferences that I love during the year, and I also am in love with Scotland. So I've been there backpacking and also with fly and drive solutions, and I'm really, really happy to come back for the country itself and for the conference. I think this is one of the best opportunities during the year to listen to great experiences and great practices. So it's in my list of best conferences as a student, I would say, because I love to learn from other people. And this year I'm coming with two hats. So I'm happy because we are bringing also some experiences from Italy, but I'm also happy, as I said before, that Tatiana will have her spot there too. And it's always good to support her and facilitate her work and her colleagues' work because it's a privilege, like you said, Alan. So
yes.
I'm really happy about that too.
And I can't thank you enough, Paula, for making that happen. It was, I'm honest, that was quite moving.
But it's not me, it's all Tatiana, and also listen to Mira. Mira is great. Mira Barzuk. She's from Ukraine too. She lives in the Netherlands. Her parents, her sister are still in Ukraine. So imagine the level of involvement she has, and at the same time, she's so great in facilitating in between two languages. Come on, it's
okay. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for sticking around after your meeting and putting up with my technology fumbles. But I think we've convinced all the audience to go there, right?
I hope so.
Yes.
Definitely. And if you can't, in the slight chance that you can't come, there is the online version as well.
Absolutely.
So, you can always come remotely and watch everything on social media as we go around multiple castles outside conference sessions.
Castle bagging.
Yeah.
All right. So again, thank you very much for joining us from Discord.
Thanks very much for having us, Alan. It's lovely to talk to everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Okay. Well, that sort of worked. But now I want to bring on, I've kept Rob waiting in the wings and then I gave him a false start and I won't talk about my technical flops here, but welcome back, Rob. And so
hello.
Introduce yourself and
sure,
give us a little spin on GoGN too.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Rob Farrow, and I'm a senior research fellow at the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University in the UK. I've been working in the open education space for about, I guess, just over 10 years. Funnily enough, I would be in that Discord meeting normally because I'm on the committee for OER23, so I didn't go because I was doing this. Now I see I could have just gone to that one and done it all in one foul swoop.
There you go.
Anyway, so one of my roles is one of the coordination team for GoGN, which is the Global OER Graduate Network. So in addition to co-chairing the OER 23 conference, which we also did for OER 22, we've got back into our face-to-face workshops. So one of the things we do with GoGN is we have a bunch of online activity throughout the year, but then alongside one or two of the bigger kind of OER conferences, we run workshops for doctoral students where we get people together, help them do a bit of networking, give them a chance to present and get some feedback, but also just kind of, get to know people who are in a similar position to them with their studies, and sometimes some people who are a bit further on and can maybe, offer a bit of support from that point of view. And it's been quite interesting. We took over the running the network in, I think it was 2016, something like that. And there are still people, who were kind of coming through, and hadn't been that many people finishing their doctorates because the program hadn't been going for that long. Now, though, there's quite a few people who we call alumni, and it's really good to see the conference schedules when you flick through them now for OE Global or the OERX conferences and that kind of thing. You see all these people who are GoGN affiliated researchers. And so, yeah, that's a really, it's been really kind of powerful to build that network and see it kind of, because it's not us telling people what to do, right? It's a sort of self-facilitating network in a lot of ways. And we just try to guide it and kind of give it a bit of shape. But people do their own thing. So it's really good to see the benefits of that network and the kind of power of the community when you get people working in that kind of open way. And I guess sometimes sharing things that they wouldn't necessarily share from a traditional point of view.
Can you talk about like what makes it so successful? Because that's quite a long run, and
yeah,
I don't even know if you can pinpoint it. That might be an unfair question.
So I mean, there's sort of two levels to it, right? So at one level, there's kind of just doing research to a decent standard and sort of helping people to do that. And because in our team, we've been doing kind of high profile research projects. I mean, it even goes further back than my involvement in. So at the Open University, there was the Open Learning Network. This was like late 2010s, I think, when it started. And I just caught the tail end of it in like 2011. But then with OER Research Hub between sort of 2012 and 2015, we were engaging with a lot of the kind of sort of methodological issues that you get, trying to understand, okay, if OER is this really flexible thing that can have all different kind of realizations, how do we actually evaluate that as if it's one thing called OER? How do we come up with tools and techniques to kind of that are reproducible to understand the impact of OER and that kind of thing? So we've been doing that sort of stuff, but also exploring what does it mean to be open in the research space. So sort of emphasizing transparency in our outputs, sharing our data, publishing open access, but also kind of the sort of the constellations within which you're working. So strong emphasis on collaboration with different groups and trying to understand what are the values around openness and around sharing in that way. And so one thing that I think is sort of distinctive about GoGN is openness is both the sort of topic of study, but it's also the approach. And it's an exploration of what it means to have that approach in that space without being dogmatic, right? So it's going to look different in different countries. It looks different in the global south, and so we try to use some of our own kind of profile to give voice to other people in the network as well, and that's a form of this kind of open sharing, I guess, as well. And so by modeling that to some extent, and maybe having a slightly more informal and approachable and accessible kind of way of talking about research than the traditional PhD doctoral sort of supervision, I think it taps into a need that people have, and it's not just people doing PhDs. Other people who do bits of research and scholarship also are affiliated to the network and they kind of use our resources and all that sort of stuff. And then there's a lot of sharing, a lot of discussion, and just kind of people saying like, this didn't work that well. I'm stuck with this. Has anyone got any ideas? Can help me, put me in touch with someone who does this kind of thing. And so all those things seem to work really well. And making people, or allowing people to feel part of something bigger, that network effect is a really important part of it. So last year we returned at OER 22 to our first face-to-face workshop for, I guess, at least a couple of years. And that's it's kind of interesting because, like a lot of people, you can do it online, right? You can have these conversations online, and it's fine, and it's to some extent a technological miracle. We don't think about it that way after all the Zoom calls and stuff for the last 2 years, but it's still pretty amazing you can do that. But I think these kind of things work better for people who've been already onboarded face-to-face. When you're trying to bring new people in and it's only online, it doesn't seem to work quite as well in terms of feeling part of something and bonding with people. There's just something about sharing food, and hanging out in the same place and making some memories together that seems to really sort of help that process. And I think there's something, it's the same sort of thing for people who started a new job in the pandemic and stuff like that. And, you join a new institution or something, and your entire experience of the people that you work with has been sort of mediated through this, Microsoft Teams or something, different kind of experience. So I think it's good to get back to the face-to-face stuff. But one outcome that was sort of good from the pandemic was it made us think a bit more about the online. I think a bit more about how can we kind of do stuff online that does bring people in a bit more than just kind of here's a webinar, and here's some stuff, here's some content. So it pushed us into a bit of an experimental space there as well. But yeah, overall GoGN is very popular. People love it.
Yeah, and because I know it's your thing, are you doing research to sort of like track what the arc of what the field has done in that span? Because that's some pretty rich material.
Yeah, we are. So I think we're presenting some of this OER 23, but we did do some work looking at kind of what sort of subjects have people been looking at in their doctorates, and how has it changed over time. So for instance, first of all, there's more of it, right? So there's more people doing research around open. I would say there's a shift, like MOOCs were really big in the kind of, 2015, 2016 kind of time when we took over the administration of the network. MOOCs were very big then, and less so now, or at least people are sort of less excited maybe about doing research on MOOCs. There's a lot of stuff's already been done, and there's kind of a little bit less sort of buzz around it maybe at the moment. One big shift is from people looking at OER to looking more at the practices around OER as the focus of research. And in a way, I think that's a maturity thing. I think as people have become more sort of, as OER has become a more familiar concept, people are kind of looking like, okay, well, what's the next thing then? And I think the OEP stuff is almost inexhaustibly interesting because people use resources in so many different ways. And so there's quite a lot of stuff like that at the moment. I would say around sort of 2018, 2019, you get quite an interesting push towards sort of social justice issues and people making a very explicit connection between doing open research and having a social justice orientation or mandate that kind of informs what's going on. And some of our researchers have been kind of world leading on that, arc of stuff. So at the moment, I mean, we've still got, 150 or so members who are researchers in the network. So they're all doing different kinds of stuff. And some of them are more institutionally focused and working directly with students. Some are more kind of, blue sky, let's say, and they're looking at wider social effects and that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's quite a lot of interesting work going on. And I think another thing that's sort of interesting that's been happening in the last few years is we've had our fellowship scheme. So we've supported 9 kind of postdoctoral research projects where people have been sort of developing their work from their doctorates a bit further. And that's all really interesting. And, people are kind of developing stuff in so many different ways. Sometimes it's hard to see the patterns overall. But I think this move towards practice is really the interesting one. And I don't think it will stop in a way because it's a very flexible category, for people doing stuff. It doesn't even necessarily have to involve OER, arguably. You could be doing something that doesn't involve OER at all and call it open practice. So that's a really interesting category. And I think that will continue to be a focus for people.
Well, good, and thank you. I said, just Rob, talk about GoGN because, well, I knew you could, but I know we would also want to talk about the work you're doing with the Encore Plus
Sure.
that I was part of a panel on, and so can you give us the synopsis of that project?
I can do, yeah. So GoGen is one of my projects at the moment. Another one is the Encore Plus project. For anyone who doesn't know, the Encore stands for European Network for Catalyzing Open Resources in Education. And we're funded by the European Commission under the Erasmus Plus program. It's not a research project, it's a knowledge alliance. So it's not trying to necessarily create new knowledge around OER, but to actually have some sort of strategic impact on what people are doing, share practices, share experiences, and try to accelerate the uptake of OER. And a big issue with this is awareness, right? Is still often the biggest barrier. A lot of people just not familiar with the idea of OER as a concept. So partly it's about doing that, not necessarily within education, although we are doing that, but also trying to find those links to other sectors, especially business. And this is partly an EU sort of strategic priority, is to try to use OER to improve the quality and lower the cost of training and lifelong learning. So there's a sort of a high-level strategic sort of vector around it. The work that I personally lead in the project is around innovation and business models relating to OER.
Mm-hmm.
So on Tuesday, we had the network event relating to this work. And what was good about it, I thought, was firstly, just from a sort of purely individualistic point of view, is getting to a point with the work that we'd been doing where it's actually ready to start presenting. And that's always quite a nice point with, research related stuff, because you actually get to the, the point where after a lot of stuff happening, with no real payoff, eventually, okay, here's the stuff that can now, we can start sharing. And you start to get answers to some of the questions that you were posing to yourself. So one of the things there is this framework we've been developing for evaluating innovation with OER. And as you know, in the webinar, I kind of presented some of the ways in which we think that's going to work, and then also the results of a survey, which basically used the framework to try and collect data around these kind of data points around innovation. And obviously, I mean, I can talk about it for quite a long time, as you know. One of the things that was that's interesting to me around this is we don't really have necessarily a kind of established language for talking about how innovation works with OER. Why does that matter? Well, a lot of the sort of categories that come from research around innovation come from commercial and business kind of studies, and they're sort of focused on how do people come up with a new idea or a new product or a new service that's innovative enough to catch on and then become a new kind of area, and that tends to be the focus. And so one of the things I think is interesting here is like the idea that a collaboration paradigm doesn't fit that well with those kind of ideas and concepts. And so sort of, looking at kind of how can we apply those things to OER? Does it make sense? I think it hangs together well enough. It is a reflective framework after all. It's supposed to be there to think about rather than to sort of, tick these boxes and it'll answer all your questions. But we also found some interesting stuff coming out of the case studies, and having actual data around business models is always good, because it's consistently an issue around sustainability and financing for OER projects, and how do they make sure that they can continue and that kind of thing. So looking for these sustainable business models, I think there's a real kind of interest there. I think we had a really good discussion with yourself and the other panelists as well around different perspectives on these kind of things.
There's one question, because I think they're going, but LMU was asking, is the Encore survey still available? And I just noticed from the link that there's an H5P version of it. So I assume the survey's still up there, or?
So the survey closed on the 28th of February. But what we're going to do is when we release the framework, you'll have the framework with all the questions. you'll have the case studies to sort of show this is what it looks like when it's completed.
Mhm.
Plus, there'll be the original survey that we use to collect the data. But I'm more than happy to share a copy of the survey if anyone who wants it. It's
Okay.
CC BY. You can do what you want with it. If you just drop me a line, you can find my email on like my Open University webpage. I'm more than happy to share it. So
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
so yeah, the idea is it's a tool for people to use, really, the framework. So, and also feedback would be good. So anyone wants to give any feedback on it, we're still in that stage where we start finalizing what's going on. But yeah, so I thought, you know, it was definitely progress for us. There's also more encore events this month. There's one next week, the week after, and the week after that. So we've got a little run of these things coming up. So we've got quality as a focus, we've got technology as a focus, and we've got policy as a focus. And that's in the next 3 weeks. And you can find more information. It's encoreproject.eu. So that's all really good. And you know what it's like when you're trying to sort of start a network. You know, it's taken a couple of years to really build awareness of what we're doing, and now we're getting to the point where it's really paying off. So it's quite exciting.
That's really good. And so, can you talk a little bit about the idea of a business model, like, because you know that probably throws people off until I think you try to get around to making it sustainable. I would imagine.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously this is another sort of spot where most of the sort of legacy knowledge comes from business studies kind of stuff, right? And kind of understanding cash flow and, you know, inputs and outputs and that kind of thing. And I don't think we could sort of say, here is the perfect business model, because, you know, everyone's circumstances vary, right? So there's no sort of universal, this solves the problem of sustainability. But what we can do is, first of all, look at all the different types of business models that have been proposed around OER and MOOCs, because there's quite a few that we should relate specifically to MOOCs. And so some of the work we did was to try to rationalize and synthesize all of the ones that currently exist into a sort of consistent typology. And so we have 14 types in our typology, and they're mixed between what we call externally funded and internally funded. So does the funding come from a government grant or philanthropy and stuff like that? We'd call that externally funded. If your institution or your business or whatever is making money available to you, we call that internally funded. Then we have a category which is community funded, where the community sort of either has a subscription kind of model or co-owns the infrastructure, or in some way kind of the community is the kind of source of income. And then we have service models, which is maybe, you know, more like the MOOC kind of things, or a university might charge for examination or something. So the content is free, but the services around it are not free. And so we call these business models. In some ways, they're more like revenue models, you might say. It's where the money comes from, because that's at least something that's consistent across all of them. There's a source of money. And one thing that's sort of interesting about this is what we did was cross-reference how people use OER. And so for this, we used the SAMR or SAMIR framework, where it's a framework of technology acceptance. So substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition. And so you can map this onto OER, and you can sort of say, well, okay, you could be substituting OER, or you could be doing something much more radical with it. And when you cross-reference that with the business models, you see something quite interesting. So it's mostly institutional business models where, you know, the university or the college or whatever is making some money available. Substitution is the most common form there. Whereas if you look at the redefinition, so when people are doing something more transformative with OER, their business models are more varied as well, and they're more kind of unusual, let's say. So these things like platformization or community funded, decentralized kind of stuff, they're also doing more interesting, or well, not necessarily more interesting, more creative things with OER as well as with their business models. That's kind of interesting. You know, you can also do various different, you know, ways of mixing up the data points and seeing the different patterns that come out of it. We've been encouraging people to look at their different stakeholders and think about what kind of value proposition are you making to these stakeholders in a kind of explicit way. And again, that is the language of kind of business studies, right? That is that kind of, what's your value proposition? What's your kind of competitive angle on this? But I do think it's interesting and valid to reflect on these things, and also the impact of it. So you're sort of saying, okay, here's what you're offering to people. What's the impact of what's coming out of that? And doing that for the different stakeholders is and also thinking about who are the stakeholders that you're really prioritizing, and when you make a pitch to them, what are you emphasizing? Is it the fact that this is a compatible sort of thing with what you're already doing? You can sort of start moving in the direction quite easily. Do you emphasize its radical nature, or it all depends on the context, but the little patterns that start to emerge are quite interesting. So hopefully people find it valid and useful.
What's the next stage after you work on the research part? How do you put it into practice?
So so this is just one bit of the work we've got going on. We've also been doing some desk research around some of the barriers and drivers for OER innovation as well. And so each of these things, has a sort of deliverable output. So we'll be writing and publishing that stuff. For the framework itself, at one level, we set it free, right? We just kind of put it out there and see if people want to use it, and hopefully they will. We are set up in such a way that we have these case studies already there. So we will be looking to do some sort of scientific publications and around that and that kind of thing. We're also going to be releasing the data openly. So that means anyone who then goes off to complete the framework for themselves, they've got a set of benchmarks that they can kind of compare themselves to and say, okay, here's another organization. They're doing a similar thing to me. They're a similar size. What are they doing? What does their business model look like? How does it compare to ours? Can we learn anything from them? We haven't quite got a way yet to share people's data back. So if they wanted to, they could share the framework back with others. Not sure how that would happen yet, right? And obviously our project has an endpoint, getting to the sort of sustainability issues ourselves, right? But in theory, there could be an online database where you kind of just put your stuff in and it shows you, here's the comparison with the other people who've, provided data. And, you can do some interesting stuff visually with that as well. I think it would be nice if we could get, not necessarily more data, but just some sort of good examples of people using that framework, and maybe we can sort of share that back through our project blog and that kind of thing, just to sort of say that this is out there for people to use. I would really like to get some more records from outside of higher education. In a way, this is a catch-22, right? Because there's not that many people outside higher education using OER in a kind of obvious way. But in a way, they are the kind of interesting cases because that's where the biggest growth is possible, because it is so sort of low activity at the moment. So that would be quite useful. The other thing to bear in mind is, so we've got these other work packages around quality and policy and technology. Each of those has their events. And in the summer, we move to a different model. So we have 3 what we call integration events. And so the idea here is we start to merge these different interest areas and bring them together. And so we've got 3 of those. I think it's June, maybe June and July, where we'll be bringing bigger groups together and sort of looking across those different areas of interest, but also across different sectors. And seeing, okay, where can we make some connections with people in, the wider world? I think it's always quite hard with open education stuff. Is you end up kind of preaching to the choir a little bit, right? You go to an OER event, all the people there know about OER, and they're pretty much up for it. Okay, cool. But how do you access those people who there's a lot of potential there if they only had an awareness of it? And so this is where with some of the ideas about the sort of value propositions and stuff like that come from, because it's like, how do you pitch to that person and very quickly get them to see the idea of OER and what it could let them do? I've been using the Dungeons and Dragons thing recently. So you may be aware, I'm not really a Dungeons and Dragons player, right? I'm just a sort of adjacent kind of nerd. So I'm kind of interested in what happens in Dungeons and Dragons, even though I'm not playing it. And for anyone who doesn't know, the game system was on an open license for like 20 years. And then the people who make Dungeons and Dragons decided, hang on, we should be making more money out of this. Let's copyright it. And so there was a massive outcry amongst the players of Dungeons and Dragons worldwide, and they were forced to do a climb down. And now it's on a CC BY license. And so why does it matter? Well, in a way, it was a sort of an environment that facilitated creativity and innovation, because people were creating their own kind of content, quests and characters and stories. They were able to say, this is for Dungeons and Dragons, right? And there was no copyright violation. So I've been trying to use this as a way to kind of get people to understand like how it enables different behaviors, and it kind of enables creativity and productivity and stuff like that. But I don't know.
That's interesting. I'm looking now at the. I vaguely remember this, but they came up with an open game license.
Yeah, that was the old one from like 20 years ago.
Okay,
so that's what they had. I don't even really know what an open game license is, right? I don't never really.
You make up your own license, right?
Yeah. But in a way, it's kind of better in a way that it's a CC BY now, because it's kind of in the fold, right? And it's got that Creative Commons kind of awareness attached to it now. So
right.
People who've heard of this kind of stuff, it got a little bit of coverage in the press. There's a way there to start trying to understand. Okay, it's an open license.
Well, I love bringing in a good analogy like that. If I could just steer back 1 second, because there was in the chat. Hang on, there's a comment here, just from another one from Lemieux about non-commercial license. Yeah, how non-commercial licenses affect sustainability. That's a thorny one.
This is an interesting one, right? Obviously, if you put a non-commercial clause on a license, you make it less open, right? You make it less possible to do things with it. And you basically add some barriers to what people can and can't do with it. And that can be appropriate in some situations. I'm not speaking against it at that level, but that is a consequence of it. I was talking with someone recently who was saying that they wanted to put their doctoral thesis into an institutional repository, and the university would only let them do it if it had a non-commercial license attached to it. That's kind of interesting, right? Because you would think universities want people to access the research and use it. I suspect, although I have no way to know this, I suspect that they have a policy which is intended to prevent anyone else commercially exploiting research done at that institution. And so you get into the kind of realms of, okay, they're sort of supporting openness, but they're doing it with a kind of closed position at one level, because they still think it's for us to benefit from. It's our intellectual property. Whether or not a university should really consider a dissertation to be their IP is another question.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't really create business models around non-commercial content, right? So in a way, that just doesn't exist for someone who's trying to make a sustainable model. But also, some of the sort of commercial benefits can be rather opaque and hidden, because it might be that you don't really have an income as such. You might have a whole thing where it's really about raising awareness of something else, right? And you do benefit from that. Does that mean you can use the non-commercial stuff just to raise your profile, but then you actually charge for something else somewhere else? This is the kind of thing you'd have to go to court to work out. But what I would say is that the non-commercial clause is basically a kind of a break on innovation potentially, and it's a break on people finding sustainable avenues. When we publish stuff, we always use CC BY, and in a way, I mean, if I think people perhaps overestimate the extent to which what they've done is commercially valuable or capable of exploitation.
Well, and it's also the idea of viewing licenses as a thing that will protect rather than enable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I never encourage anyone to put a non-commercial clause on it unless that's the only way in which they feel comfortable. In which case, yeah, cool, that's fine. Personally, I find CC BY is the sweet spot, because I don't mind people using my stuff, but I don't mind, I kind of like getting acknowledged for having done something. So we tend to do that rather than CC0, although we put data on CC0 usually, because it's a bit more practical.
That makes sense.
But we didn't necessarily ask people, when we did the survey, we didn't ask people what licenses are you using. I guess we were thinking there might be consumers of OER, but not producers, for instance. But that maybe it was something we could have asked, and see if there's a connection there between, for instance, people who felt that their needs, that their aspirations for the project were being met, were they using a non-commercial license or not? That would be an interesting question to ask. We didn't ask it, but we could potentially put it in the framework still when we publish it as a question. Have you thought about the open licenses that are involved, and have you got any reason not to use CC BY or something like that?
That's right. I want to, sorry, before we get to the end, I'm going to
Sure.
steer it back to GoGN, because we have a question from Maria Angelica, who's actually one of our interns. And she was asking within GoGN if there are any participants from Latin America, and is it limited to English only, because she's actually interested in doing some Latin American research.
So you should definitely join GoGN. We have other Latin American members. We actually had a contingent in Mexico in January. I forget the name of the conference, but we found some new members there. We did a mentoring program last year for focused specifically on Latin American scholars. A big part of what we do is to try to offer some balance to the kind of hegemony of the global north and kind of Anglo spheres around this stuff. So we're definitely interested as much as possible in amplifying voices that are less heard and less prominent in the discourse. GoGN is free to join. It's a good community. I recommend for anyone. We do have resources in other languages. We've got so many members in different places that we can translate stuff. It sometimes takes us a little while, right? But we have the facility to do that. And indeed, if you did join, Maria, you would be maybe helpful to translate some of those things for the rest of the network. But I don't want to try and give you a job straight away. But this is kind of how it works, right? It's a network where we all sort of help each other, and we try to make things happen like that. So yeah, we're always looking for more members, and we're always interested in hearing from people. So have a look at the website. It's easy to join there. There's a form, and just go from there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for joining the show, putting up with some of my technology flopping around, but that's what happens when we go live. And it's always great to talk to you. And I encourage people to participate and follow both Rob's work with GoGN and with the Encore Plus network.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
All right. I'm going to play our little outro music, and then we're off for a couple hours.